The slapping incidents. Sicily, August 1943. The Mediterranean sun blazed mercilessly over the 15th Evacuation Hospital near Nicosia, Sicily. Inside the sweltering tent that served as the medical ward, the air hung thick with the smell of antiseptic and the muted groans of wounded soldiers. General George S. Patton, Jr., commanding officer of the 7th Army, strode through the rows of cots, his polished boots clicking against the wooden planks laid over the dirt floor. At 47 years old, Patton cut an imposing figure, tall, silver-haired, with piercing blue eyes that seemed to look straight through a man. His uniform was immaculate despite the dust and heat of the Sicilian campaign, adorned with ribbons and the two ivory-handled revolvers that had become his trademark. General on deck. A young nurse snapped to attention, her face flushed from the oppressive heat. Patton waved her off impatiently. As you were. I'm here to see my boys. He moved from bed to bed, speaking words of encouragement to soldiers with shrapnel wounds, broken bones, and burns. His voice was gruff but genuine as he praised their courage and assured them their sacrifices mattered. The wounded men's faces lit up despite their pain. A visit from Old Blood and Guts himself was worth more than morphine to their morale. Then Patton reached a cot near the back of the tent where a young private sat upright, staring at nothing. The soldier appeared physically unharmed, no bandages, no visible wounds. His hands trembled slightly as they rested on his knees. "What's your name, soldier?" Patton demanded. The private looked up slowly, his eyes hollow and distant. "Private Charles Cole, sir. Company L." "What are you doing here, Cole? I don't see any wounds on you." The young man's voice cracked. I can't take it anymore, sir. The shelling. I can't." Patton's face darkened. "Can't take it? Can't take what?" "The noise, sir. The explosions. Every time I close my eyes, I see my buddies getting blown apart. I shake all the time. I can't eat. I can't." "You're a goddamned coward." Patton's voice exploded through the tent, silencing every conversation. "You're sitting here on your yellow belly while brave men are dying. You're a disgrace to the army." Before anyone could react, Patton's hand shot out and slapped Cole across the face with his glove. The crack echoed through the tent like a rifle shot. "Get this man out of here." Patton shouted at the stunned medical staff. "I won't have cowards in the same hospital as my brave boys. I won't have them demoralizing the wounded." Colonel Donald Currier, the hospital commander, rushed forward. "General Patton, this man is suffering from severe battle fatigue. He's been diagnosed by our psychiatrists as battle fatigue." Patton's face turned crimson. "There's no such thing. It's cowardice, pure and simple." He turned back to Cole, who was now crying, his hand pressed to his reddening cheek. "You hear me, soldier? You ought to be lined up against a wall and shot. In fact, I ought to shoot you myself right now." Patton's hand moved toward one of his revolvers. Colonel Currier stepped between them, his voice calm but firm despite the tremor in his hands. "Sir, I must ask you to leave. This man is under medical care." For a moment, the tent was silent except for the distant rumble of artillery. Patton's hand hovered over his pistol, his jaw clenched so tight the muscles stood out like cords. Then, with visible effort, he released his grip and stormed out of the tent, leaving a wake of shocked silence. Private Cole sat motionless, tears streaming down his face. A nurse hurried to his side, but he barely seemed to notice her presence. Colonel Currier watched the general's retreating figure, then turned to his staff. "Document everything that just happened. Every word, every action. This cannot stand." 1 week later, at the 93rd Evacuation Hospital near Sant'Agata, history repeated itself with even more violence. The afternoon heat was unbearable as Patton conducted another hospital inspection. He had just finished speaking with a soldier who had lost both legs to a mine, praising the young man's courage and promising him a medal. His mood seemed improved from the previous week. Then he came upon Private Paul Bennett, 21 years old, sitting on his cot with his head in his hands. Like Cole, Bennett showed no visible injuries. "And what's wrong with you?" Patton asked, his tone already edged with suspicion. Bennett looked up, his eyes red-rimmed and exhausted. "It's my nerves, sir. I can't stand the shelling anymore." Something snapped in Patton. Without warning, he grabbed Bennett by the collar and yanked him to his feet, then slapped him hard across the face with his bare hand. "Your nerves. Hell, you're going back to the front lines, and you may get shot and killed, but you're going to fight. If you don't, I'll stand you up against a wall and have a firing squad kill you on purpose." Bennett's nose began to bleed. Patton slapped him again, this time with such force that Bennett's helmet liner flew off and clattered to the floor. "Coward. You're a disgrace. You're going back to the front." Medical staff rushed forward, but Patton wasn't finished. He drew one of his pistols, waving it in Bennett's face. "I ought to shoot you myself, you whimpering coward." Lieutenant Colonel Perrin Long, the hospital's receiving officer, grabbed Patton's arm. "General. Sir, you must stop. This man is ill." Patton shook him off violently but holstered his weapon. He turned to the hospital commander, Brigadier General Frederick Bless, who had just arrived, drawn by the commotion. "General Bless, I want this man sent back to his unit immediately. I won't have these cowards contaminating my wounded heroes." Bless, a career medical officer with 30 years of service, stood his ground. "Sir, this soldier is under my medical authority. He's been diagnosed with severe psychoneurosis and is unfit for duty. I don't give a damn about your diagnosis. This is cowardice, nothing more. With respect, General Patton, you are in my hospital. This man stays under medical care." For a long moment, the two generals faced each other, Patton trembling with rage, Bless calm but immovable. Finally, Patton spun on his heel and marched out, shouting over his shoulder, "You're all too soft. We're never going to win this war, coddling cowards." After he left, Lieutenant Colonel Long helped Bennett back to his cot. The young private's face was swelling, blood still trickling from his nose. "Sir," Long said to General Bless, "we have to report this. Both incidents." Bless nodded grimly. "Start writing. I'll make sure this reaches General Eisenhower's desk within 24 hours." That evening, as the Sicilian sun set over the Mediterranean, war correspondents Demery Bess of the Saturday Evening Post and Merrill Red Mueller of NBC were having drinks with several officers at Allied headquarters in Palermo. The story of Patton's hospital visits had already spread through the medical corps like wildfire. "Is it true?" Bess asked Major John Porter, a medical officer he'd known since North Africa. "Did Patton actually pull his gun on wounded soldiers?" Porter set down his glass carefully. "I wasn't there, but I've seen the reports. 2 incidents, a week apart. He slapped them, called them cowards, threatened to shoot them. These men were legitimately ill, Demery. Combat exhaustion, we're seeing it more and more." Mueller leaned forward. "This is a hell of a story, John. The American people need to know." "The German army needs to know more," Porter interrupted. "Think about what you're doing. Patton's the one general the Germans truly fear. He's winning this campaign. If you break this story now, you might get him relieved of command. Is that what you want? To help the Nazis?" The correspondents exchanged glances. Bess lit a cigarette, his hand not quite steady. "Eisenhower knows?" Mueller asked. "By now?" "Definitely. The medical reports went up the chain of command immediately." "Then let's see what Ike does," Bess said finally. "If he handles it appropriately, maybe there's no story. But if he covers it up..." He left the threat hanging in the air. In his headquarters office that same evening, General Dwight D. Eisenhower sat alone, reading the medical reports for the 3rd time. His usually friendly face was drawn, the stress of commanding the Allied forces in the Mediterranean theater aging him visibly. At 52, Ike had risen from obscurity to supreme commander through a combination of strategic brilliance and diplomatic skill, but nothing had prepared him for this. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in." His chief of staff, Major General Walter Bedell Smith, entered carrying more papers. Smith's face was grimmer than usual for a man known for his stern demeanor. "More witness statements, Ike." A nurse, 2 doctors, and 3 enlisted men who were present. "They all corroborate the reports." Eisenhower removed his reading glasses and rubbed his eyes. "Christ, Beetle. What was George thinking? Does he ever think? He reacts. You know that. He's the best damn combat commander we have. The Sicily campaign succeeded because of him. And now he's assaulted 2 enlisted men suffering from legitimate medical conditions. Threatened them with execution. Drew his weapon in a hospital full of wounded soldiers." Smith dropped the papers on Eisenhower's desk. "The correspondents know, Ike. They're sitting on it for now, but they won't wait forever." Eisenhower stood and walked to the window, looking out at the darkening sky over Palermo. In the distance, he could see the harbor where ships were unloading supplies for the push into Italy. Thousands of young American soldiers, counting on him to lead them to victory. "If I relieve him, the Germans will celebrate. They're more afraid of Patton than any other Allied general. Hell, their intelligence thinks he's going to lead the invasion of France. We've been using that fear for deception purposes. If you don't relieve him, you're telling every soldier in this man's army that officers can physically assault enlisted men with impunity. You're telling them that combat exhaustion, a real medical condition that could affect any of them, is cowardice. And you're telling the press that the army covers up for its stars." Eisenhower turned back to face his chief of staff. The 2 men had worked together for years, and Smith knew better than anyone how to cut through to the heart of a problem. "You're right, Beetle. God help me, you're right. But I need Patton. Not just for his tactical skills, for what he represents to the men. He's a fighter. He inspires them. Then inspire them yourself, Ike. Be the leader who holds everyone accountable, even the stars. Especially the stars." Eisenhower sat back down heavily in his chair. "Get me everything, all reports, all witness statements, all medical records on these 2 soldiers. And find out exactly what the correspondents know. I need to think this through." After Smith left, Eisenhower sat in silence, the weight of command pressing down on him like a physical force. Through the open window, he could hear the sounds of the city, soldiers laughing in the streets, truck engines rumbling, the distant echo of a gramophone playing Glenn Miller's "In the Mood." He picked up the photograph on his desk, his wife Mamie, smiling at the camera. He'd been away from her for nearly 2 years now, carrying the burden of sending young men to their deaths, making decisions that would echo through history. Now he had to decide what to do about George S. Patton, his most brilliant and most volatile commander. The moon rose over Sicily as Eisenhower began to write. The investigation. Allied Headquarters, Algiers, August 19, 1943. The morning sun cast long shadows across Eisenhower's temporary office in the St. George's Hotel. He had barely slept, spending most of the night reviewing reports and drafting responses. Now, at 0600 hours, he was reading the latest intelligence summaries when Major General Smith entered without knocking, a privilege afforded only to his closest confidant. "The correspondents are meeting this morning," Smith said without preamble. "Quinton Reynolds flew in from London last night. They're all at the Aletti Hotel." Eisenhower set down his coffee cup carefully, as if any sudden movement might shatter his composure. "How many?" "7. Bess, Mueller, Reynolds, plus 4 others. They're calling it a formal discussion about command accountability and press responsibility. In other words, they're deciding whether to destroy Patton. Or whether to let you handle it first." Eisenhower stood and walked to the map of the Mediterranean theater that dominated one wall. Sicily was now firmly in Allied hands, marked with blue pins. Italy loomed across the narrow strait, the next objective, with Rome glittering as the ultimate prize. Get me a meeting with them. This afternoon. And Beetle? Get General Patton on a plane. I want him here tomorrow morning. Smith nodded and turned to leave, but Eisenhower's voice stopped him. One more thing. I want complete medical workups on both soldiers, Cole and Bennett. Their full service records, psychiatric evaluations, everything. And I want to know how many other men in this theater are being treated for combat exhaustion. Looking for context. Looking for truth. If George is right, if these men were malingering, gaming the system to escape combat, then this becomes a discipline issue. But if he assaulted legitimately ill soldiers? Eisenhower didn't finish the thought. The Aleti Hotel, Algiers, 1,400 hours. 7 war correspondents sat around a table in a private dining room, cigarette smoke forming a blue haze beneath the ceiling fan. These were hardened journalists who had covered the North African campaign, witnessed the brutality of modern warfare firsthand, and earned the trust of soldiers who told them things they'd never tell officers. Demery Bess, at 45 the eldest and most experienced, served as unofficial chairman. He stubbed out his lucky strike and looked around the table. Gentlemen, we all know why we're here. George Patton slapped 2 soldiers in separate incidents, both suffering from combat exhaustion. He called them cowards, threatened to execute them, and in the second instance drew his weapon. These are facts, witnessed by medical personnel and other soldiers. The story of the year, muttered Al Newman of Newsweek. Maybe the war. Or the story that loses us the war, countered Quinton Reynolds, who had flown bombing missions over Germany and earned the respect of every correspondent present. Patton scares the hell out of the Germans. His Third Army doesn't exist yet, but German intelligence thinks it does. They're repositioning divisions based on where they think Patton will attack. So we're supposed to cover up an assault? Newman shot back. That's not journalism, Quinton. That's propaganda. It's war, Reynolds said quietly. Different rules. Merrill Mueller, who had been present when medical officers first discussed the incidents, leaned forward. I've been thinking about this for days. Here's what bothers me, if we break this story, we're not just hurting Patton. We're telling every German commander that the Allies are in disarray, that we're losing confidence in our generals. We're potentially prolonging the war. And if we don't break it, Bess said, we're telling the American public that the military can do whatever it wants, that enlisted men are expendable, that officers are above the law. We're betraying every principle of a free press. A knock at the door interrupted the debate. A young lieutenant entered and saluted. Gentlemen, General Eisenhower requests the honor of your presence at Allied headquarters at 1,600 hours. After the lieutenant left, the correspondents sat in silence. Finally, Bess spoke. Well, Ike's going to address it. That's something. Or spin it, Newman said cynically. Ike doesn't spin, Reynolds said firmly. I've known him since before the war. If he's calling us in, he's going to be straight with us. Then let's hear what he has to say, Bess decided. But we don't promise anything. We're correspondents, not public relations officers. Allied headquarters, 1,600 hours. Eisenhower's office had been transformed into a meeting room, with additional chairs brought in and arranged in a semicircle. The Supreme Commander stood when the correspondents entered, his famous smile notably absent. He looked exhausted, the bags under his eyes betraying his sleepless night. Gentlemen, thank you for coming. Please, sit down. As they settled, Eisenhower remained standing, his hands clasped behind his back in a posture familiar to anyone who had served under him. I'm not going to insult your intelligence by pretending I don't know why you're here. You're aware of the incidents involving General Patton and 2 enlisted men at evacuation hospitals in Sicily. You're deciding whether to report them, and you're wondering what I'm going to do about it. He paused, and in that moment every correspondent recognized they were witnessing something rare, a commanding general treating the press as equals rather than obstacles. First, let me tell you what I know. I've read the medical reports, witness statements, and psychiatric evaluations. I've reviewed the service records of Private Cole and Private Bennett. I've consulted with our chief medical officer and our psychiatrists. I've examined casualty statistics and incident reports from every division under my command. Eisenhower moved to his desk and picked up a thick folder. Private Charles Cole enlisted in 1942. He's 26 years old, from Indiana. He served with distinction in North Africa, was wounded by shrapnel in March. He stayed at his post until his squad completed their mission. He was diagnosed with chronic dysentery in May but remained on duty. He has malaria. He was hospitalized for exhaustion in July, recovered, returned to his unit. In August, after witnessing several close friends killed in an artillery barrage, he suffered a complete mental breakdown. The medical diagnosis is severe psychoneurosis, chronic anxiety state, and depression. He set down Cole's file and picked up another. Private Paul Bennett is 21, from South Carolina. Decorated for bravery at Jello. Volunteered for hazardous reconnaissance missions. In the week before General Patton encountered him, Bennett's best friend was killed by a sniper while Bennett was standing next to him. He began experiencing severe tremors, couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. Medical diagnosis, acute anxiety reaction, combat exhaustion. Eisenhower set down the file and looked directly at the correspondence. These are not cowards. These are brave men who gave everything they had until their minds and bodies could give no more. General Patton was wrong. Completely, inexcusably wrong. The room was silent. Demery Bess found himself leaning forward, hanging on every word. Now, here's what I'm going to do. I'm ordering General Patton to apologize personally to both soldiers, to the medical staff present, and to every division under his command. I'm writing formal letters of reprimand that will become part of his permanent record. I'm requiring him to undergo counseling on combat stress and the psychological impacts of warfare. And I'm making it clear that any similar behavior will result in immediate relief of command and court-martial. But you're not relieving him now, Quinton Reynolds said, not an accusation, just a statement of fact. No, I'm not. And I'm going to tell you why, as honestly as I can. Eisenhower sat down, suddenly looking more like a tired man than a commanding general. George Patton is the most gifted tactical commander in the American Army. The Germans fear him more than any other Allied general. Our intelligence has intercepted German communications specifically discussing the Patton threat. We're using that fear as part of our deception operations for the eventual invasion of France. He paused, choosing his words carefully. But that's not why I'm keeping him. I'm keeping him because I believe people can learn from their mistakes, can grow, can become better. I'm keeping him because I think this experience, the humiliation of apologizing, the formal reprimand, the requirement to educate himself, will make him a better commander. And I'm keeping him because I won't let one terrible mistake, however serious, erase years of brilliant service. Al Newman spoke up, his voice skeptical. General, with respect, you're asking us to sit on the story of a high-ranking officer assaulting enlisted men. How is that consistent with the values we're supposedly fighting for? I'm not asking you to sit on anything, Mr. Newman. I'm asking you to consider the broader context and make your own decision. But I want you to know what I'm doing, and why, so you can make an informed choice. Eisenhower stood again, his voice taking on a harder edge. If you publish this story now, it will dominate headlines for weeks. Patton will likely be relieved and sent home in disgrace. The Germans will celebrate. Our deception operations will be compromised. But more than that, every soldier in this theater, every soldier fighting in the Pacific, will learn that their commanders view combat exhaustion as weakness rather than injury. We're already seeing increasing rates of psychological casualties. If we send the message that seeking help is cowardice, more men will suffer in silence rather than get treatment. More will die. So we're supposed to consider the propaganda value over the truth? Bess asked, but his tone was thoughtful rather than confrontational. I'm asking you to consider the impact of when and how you tell the truth. This is war, gentlemen. Every decision has consequences measured in lives. Mueller spoke up. What about the soldiers, General? Cole and Bennett. Don't they deserve justice? Justice isn't always punishment, Mr. Mueller. Justice is making things right.